Hello, welcome back to another episode of the FGLI podcast. This is episode 3. And in this episode, we'll be sitting down with Lyndsi Burcham, Penn class of 2019 alum and current program manager at Financial Wellness at Penn. Throughout this conversation, we'll be touching on a variety of different topics, ranging from the early roots of FGLI advocacy at Penn and what that looked like during a time before Penn First Plus, to Lyndsi's FGLI experience during college and post-grad, along with all of the emotions and challenges that come with that. We learned a lot from our conversation with Lyndsi, so please stay tuned and enjoy.
All right, welcome to the next episode of our podcast. Today we have Lyndsi from Financial Wellness, and your hosts today are Peter and Talun.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us today. Lyndsi and I actually met for the first time. If people remember last year, there was a bit of a housing crisis. Before we get too much into that, do you kind of want to introduce yourself, your background?
Yeah. So my name is Lyndsi Burcham. I am a Penn alum. I graduated from the College of Arts and Sciences in 2019. I'm originally from Kansas City, Missouri. And now I manage the Financial Wellness at Penn program. So I've been working for about 4 years now in student registration and financial services. So that is the gist of my background.
Awesome. Before we get started with the more complex, more like nuanced topics, I just wanted to hear your opinion on what your favorite food truck is on campus, because I'm sure having been here for a couple of years now, you probably have figured out which ones you like, which ones you don't like. Any recommendations?
Okay, so number one is always have to be Tacos do Memo, which is like kind of under the 38th Street Bridge, between Walnut and Spruce. Incredible. Prices have significantly risen since, when I first went as a student, but I've been here 8 years, right? So that is the number one. I feel like sleeper hit is on Spruce. I think between Lower and Upper Quad Gate, there's a Vietnamese food truck. I don't know exactly what it's called, but I loved that when I was a student. Those would be my two picks.
Okay.
Nice.
Awesome.
Nothing will depress me. I used to go to the halal truck on Drexel all the time.
Really?
Southern Water. And then they upped their price to $10.
Yeah.
And I was so sad.
It's brutal.
Arguably speaking, like, they give you a lot more food.
Yeah.
But, like, it's still halal.
Yeah. You're like, also when I was a student, there was big drama, I want to say my sophomore or junior year, because like chicken over rice went from being $5 to $6. And it was like, it was $5 my like freshman and sophomore years. Yes, big, what is the word I'm looking for? Scandal on campus. Yeah, genuinely, people were flipping out. But yeah, $10 is insane.
It's so sad.
Yeah.
All right. Like you said, you've been here for about 8 years now.
Yeah.
We were curious to learn more about your journey as a student at Penn, and I guess like after that, if you want to talk a bit about your professional career, how you kind of found where you ended up like today.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, in general, like I had a really good time at Penn. I think I had a lot of fear coming in because I knew I was a first-gen low-income student, and I knew I was coming to a place like Penn where there are a lot of, like, much more affluent students. And so I certainly had anxieties about that coming in, but I had actually connected with, like, the folks who essentially are the founders of Penn First, the student group, when I was coming in. They had posted in our class's Facebook group looking for freshman liaisons. And so I had applied for that, and I had gotten connected with them so early on that I felt like, because I found community that I could relate to really early on, I didn't really have a lot of trouble while I was here. And like, I feel like I had a really unique and privileged experience at Penn, because I think the other factor that was unique for me, I lived in Harrison College House all 4 years, because when I came in 2015, they still had a residential program that was called Freshman Experience. And so I lived with 50 other freshmen in Harrison, and then they were upperclassmen. And so we weren't exposed to like the same culture necessarily that folks who start off in the quad or hill or something like that would have. And so I just feel like the typical like difficulties that I think a lot of people talk about when they come here as FGLI students, I wasn't exposed to a lot of that, for better or worse. And so like I truly had my first difficult experience with somebody when it came to like discussing socioeconomic status like the summer after my junior year, when I had an internship with somebody, and we actually ended up being friends, but it was the first time I had really been confronted with somebody who just truly didn't understand what life was like for FGLI students and was completely out of touch, which getting through that much of my time at Penn without like having to face that again is a really privileged perspective, because I think a lot of folks, depending on the courses you're taking or the student groups you're a part of, like you have to confront that on a much regular basis. So I had quite a good time here. I really found my community both through Penn First, and then I also worked in Harrison as well as living there, and so I met my best friends at Penn, primarily through working in Harrison, and really, really loved that community. Penn First was great because I think that was kind of where the seed was planted for me ending up in higher ed. So essentially what my role was in Penn First for most of the time that I was there was serving in some sort of advocacy capacity. And so essentially what that meant was being a liaison with different administrators to talk about issues that FGLI students were facing, and like trying to learn more about the admin perspective, trying to help them understand how students are experiencing things to hopefully reach more of a middle ground of like how to support students while also like, I don't know, being compliant with whatever university policies are or things like that. And so, yeah, it was that experience working in Harrison, and then also the same internship I talked about earlier where I met somebody that was maybe a little difficult in terms of class. I worked for the Office of New Student Orientation, which was absolutely fantastic. If I could recommend anything to folks at Penn, it's like spend a summer on campus doing something. I know a lot of folks know their particular career interests, and maybe it doesn't seem like the best fit, but for me, it was such a fulfilling and just like summer of exploration for me, I think. And so that was the summer after my junior year, and I don't know, initially I thought I wanted to go into academia for psychology, and I thought I eventually wanted to be a professor and do research. And I was researching PhD programs that summer, and I realized I don't care about this at all. Like, looking at this is so utterly uninteresting to me, and like the thing that actually makes me excited to do stuff is like working with students. Like, even the thing that really drove it home for me was even the simple stuff working at NSO felt exciting and fulfilling to me. I would answer phone calls, I would respond to emails from students, and I felt so happy just to be able to say, like, I'm so excited you're coming to campus, and I'm so excited that we get to see you soon, to incoming students. And it feels really cheesy to say that, and it is also genuinely how I felt, And so that's kind of how I ended up here. Is I had an epiphany that summer that I wanted to work at a university in some capacity. I had kind of arbitrarily decided that I wanted to stay in Philly, and specifically at Penn, because at that time I just felt like I don't know how to exist elsewhere in the world. Like, I've felt like an adult at Penn for the past 4 years, and like especially with just a lot of unknowns with income and whatnot. I knew the summer after my senior year I could continue working with New Student Orientation until I found a job, which was, again, another really privileged position. And, my boss there was Troy Monerick, who works in NSO, and he was just such a phenomenal role model and mentor during that time, and continues to be. And so, yeah, I felt really supported just to take the time to figure out what I wanted. When the financial wellness position had been posted, my current boss had reached out saying, you know, we know you're looking for jobs in higher ed, and, you know, if you're interested at all, this is the position we're posting, and we would be happy to see you in the candidate pool. To which I said, well, I don't think I'm qualified for this, right? And I had said, other than managing my own money, which I've done for the past 4 years out of necessity, I don't really know anything about personal finance. And so he was like, I'm going to take you out to coffee and explain to you why you are qualified for this. Because the work I had done as a student, had indicated, the experience I had, the tenacity I had, and, trying to help students solve problems in some way. And so even if I didn't have the personal finance knowledge, what I've come to learn since being in this position for 4 years is that's the easy part of the job. Learning the information to then teach to students really was the easy part. I didn't have a lot of that knowledge coming in, but also it served as an asset because it meant if I'm learning it for the first time, I'm able to identify where are the sticking points and what are the pieces that folks may not understand easily, so that I can really think through how to best talk about those topics to help students understand as much as possible. And so, yeah, that was really the easy part. The hard part is actually building a program, building a plan. And those were things that I effectively had done through Penn First. And I had done the programming piece through Harrison and New Student Orientation. And so I had the experience, but I hadn't seen it that way. And so luckily I interviewed and ended up getting the job, and I have loved it every minute since. Had you asked me 5 years ago if I thought I would be here, I would say absolutely not. And yet I think it is truly one of the greatest blessings in my life.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think when we're talking about personal finance, especially too, I think once you get into Penn, there's this kind of idea that you should already know everything, and it's kind of embarrassing to go out and be I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to handle my finances. So having those workshops institutionalized in Penn and happen so frequently is an amazing thing to accomplish. I still know friends now who are I don't know about credit.
Yeah.
Because you kind of grow up in this idea of being in debt and credit cards being scary.
Yeah.
I wanted to focus on Penn First for a second. Penn First now has been kind of 8 years removed, so anyone who might have been on the board when you were there has graduated, kind of moved on. I was wondering if you could tell me more about what it was like in those early days of FGLI organization and event planning, kind of all aspects of it, whatever you find most interesting, whether it's funding sources, student attendance, and just getting off the ground.
Yeah, great question. So just to talk a little bit about the history that actually preceded me was earlier that year in 2015. I think it was the first IVG conference had taken place. I may be wrong that it was the first. If anything, it was the first that our school had attended. And so essentially, different students from Penn had attended and hadn't met before that point, and felt passionate about creating some sort of program for FGLI students, or some sort of singular resource to use. And so that is really where the first connection point was made, and where folks decided to create the group. Technically, since my other co-freshman liaison and I joined that first semester, we are credited technically with being founders of the group because we were on the first board, but really it was the individuals before us who created the group. And so I do feel really honored to be included in a group with those folks, because I think all the like sitting in the office we're literally sitting in right now, like sitting in Penn First Plus to record this, like none of this would have happened without them, you know? And so when I joined, kind of, it was still the beginning. Like they had talked a lot about what they wanted to do for FGLI students, but nothing was really happening yet. And so, I mean, in our first semester, or maybe it was the second semester, we essentially got a meeting with a group called Penn Pathways, which is, I don't really know the best way to explain it, but maybe like a working group of individuals who work in different offices throughout the university who are focused on, like, how do we move university priorities forward? Like, how do we best support students? That's kind of my interpretation of what they did. So they had a meeting with us to learn more about, like, what do FGLI students want? Because I think conversations about resources for FGLI students had been happening for a while. I mean, since Amy Gutman was our president, I think she really wanted her legacy at Penn to be about the work that she did for FGLI students, because she had been a FGLI student at Harvard. And so those conversations were definitely happening, but I don't know to what degree students had been included in them before, and like talking directly to FGLI students to ask what they wanted. And so this is all me rambling to say we finally got connected with folks who wanted to hear what we had to say, and who actively wanted to know, like, what is missing. In our first year, we worked really closely with staff at the Greenfield Intercultural Center, the GIC, specifically Valerie DeCruz. She is a phenomenal advocate for truly anybody who feels they don't really have their place at Penn, and like just has done a lot of work to support student groups that have led to some of the like institutional changes that have happened throughout her time here. And so, you know, we really have Valerie DeCruz to thank, and then also just the staff in the office of the vice provost of university life at that time. And so we met with Penn Pathways. They essentially were like, okay, cool, we hear you, and we're going to figure out what we can do. And so we asked for a dedicated space as a long-term goal, like a 10-year goal. And that fall, they opened up what was like the FGLI program on the second floor of the GIC. And we didn't think it was going to happen. You know, it was just completely unprecedented to us. Like, I'm kind of like stumbling over my words, but the work that group did was important because we had very adamant and persistent students on the board. But I also want to highlight that we were unique in that we had a university that was willing to listen. And I feel like I can say this as staff now also, but like, admittedly as students, like sometimes we feel good about the things Penn does and sometimes we don't. And like, that is the reality of things. This was an area where I felt like Penn is going above and beyond. And when we would go to IVG conferences in later years, or, you know, FGLI students at other schools would reach out to our group to ask about our experience and how did you get XYZ resource, etc. We were very privileged to have a university president whose entire goal was to improve the life experience of FGLI students on campus. And that's not to say those students didn't continue to struggle in different ways and that they don't continue to struggle now. But the work that Penn did in such a short time compared to other universities is absolutely outstanding. And so it really felt like we were part of something important. It felt like we were being heard. It felt like we had a lot of privilege in that pretty much all the things we asked for, we were told yes, or we were told, like, we can't do it right now, but we're doing our best. Or if we can't do it, here's why, and we hope you understand, like, the institutional limitations. And that's something that I always valued, which was, like, if it's going to be a no, I want to understand why, and then I want to be able to work with you to help you understand how students are perceiving this and what is actually going to make students feel heard and supported. And so that was most of my experience with Penn First. I developed really close relationships with folks in financial aid, which is ironic because it's effectively the folks that are now my colleagues that I see on a daily basis. I learned so much about how to negotiate with folks and how to express difficulties and challenges in a way that isn't just, well, you did this and people are suffering, figure it out. But like, how can we work together to make this mutually beneficial for all of us? Because I promise you, no admin are sitting in rooms being like, how can we make the kids suffer today? You know? And I know sometimes it doesn't feel that way as a student. Sometimes it feels like, wow, they really said, like, all right, you're on your own today. But that doesn't mean that that's the intention, right? And so a lot of this work is still happening for the first time ever anywhere, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. So, again, long-winded answer, but that really was what my experience on Penn First was like.
And I guess, like, building onto that, like, taking your experience from Penn First and really, like, advocating for the FGLI, like, community. I know you, like, touched upon, like, some of the things you learned along the way about, like, advocacy, how to really, like, communicate the challenges that FGLI students experience to, like, admin and other people. I guess, what are some tips or advice you might have for, like, current students who are trying to also, like, raise, like, awareness about, like, FGLI challenges, or just, like, how would you recommend, like, really promoting, like, discourse about, like, different FGLI challenges?
Yeah. It's a great question. I was going to start by saying if I had one piece of advice, it would be this, but I know I'm about to say like 10 different things. So I'm just going to ramble again and you can make sense of it, I guess. Where I would start is just start the conversation. Don't overthink about how to do it. The thing that's important to keep in mind is like those of us who are working here, we know we are working with like 18 to 22 year olds who are maybe navigating like difficulties like this for the first time, and maybe you don't have the best tools or words to use for navigating these conversations. And so I think it's important to be honest about that and to explicitly say like, I maybe don't fully understand your perspective, but this is my perspective. Can we talk about what your perspective is so that we can understand, like, where is their middle ground, right? Because I think when you approach it in that human form and you can fully explain, like, I know this is not your intention, but this is how it's being perceived. Like, at the end of the day, everyone who is here working in higher ed wants to work here because we want to support students. And so if there is misunderstanding, and this can happen a lot because a lot of folks who work in higher ed are like sitting in an office, grinding through a bunch of work, and maybe not getting as much face-to-face time with students to where they have the like full reality check of this is how students are feeling, this is what they're experiencing right now. And so as much as you can like communicate about those things. Now the hard thing about communicating about those things is you need to know where to communicate it, right? Well, the thing that's nice now is you have Penn First Plus. And so you can always talk to the staff here. I am biased because I work with them, but I do think they're quite great. And I think, like, I don't know, anytime I get asked, like, what is like the best advice I could give to students? It's always like, find one person at the university that you trust. It doesn't really matter where they sit in the university. This could be somebody in financial aid. It could be staff in the college house that you live in. It could be one of your professors or an academic advisor or whatever. Find some adult that you trust and like be willing to be vulnerable with them and go to them with questions, because even if you don't know where to get the answer you're looking for, they may be able to help you find it. And so like find a person to talk to. And so if there are specific issues you want to pursue, like going to staff at P1P, they are going to be able to help you either say like, yes, we are the people to talk to, or say, you know, this is a financial aid question and I'm happy to connect you with folks in financial aid, etc., to talk about this, or whatever it is. Like, we're not just swallowing the concerns and saying like, well, eventually this will all go away, right? So that would be my best advice, is just continue the conversation. Don't assume like staff don't care. Don't assume they're not already thinking about it. And also sometimes maybe we do miss things, right? We're not fully in the loop as much as you would think that we are. And so just be willing to have the conversation, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Awesome advice. I think kind of just in a retrospective, since you've been at Penn this whole time, seeing kind of, you talked about the process of kind of getting the ball running. Now you see all the rewards of this exploding like FGLI community, to the point where it's almost like we have too many clubs, too many people. What is that like to kind of look back and see everything? Are there any like moments in particular that stick out to you? Is there any like moments in the future that you're looking forward to?
It's so funny because now, like, anytime I tell people I was part of Penn First, they're like, oh, Penn First Plus. And I'm like, no. I'm like, this is what Penn First Plus was named after, but no. So it's been fascinating to see it, because when I was here, Penn First was really the only group. The only other groups that existed were Flight, so the, like, FGLI students in technology and engineering, maybe. 7-8, so the like Pan-Asian FGLI group, and then I feel like there was one more, but I can't remember what it was. And so it was really just Penn First, like, and then the FGLI program existed, but they had a part-time coordinator, and Penn First Plus didn't exist, and so people just came to us, like the FGLI group me that has thousands of people in it now. Like, we are the ones who created that. Like, we sat in a room and decided, you know, what if we just did it, you know? And now students continue to use it, right? It's really fun to see all these groups pop up, because I think, like, when I was in Penn First, we had a lot of conversations about how do we get more representation from other schools on the board. And I'm sure, like, you all have probably experienced any group you're a part of, there's a lot of college and there's a lot of Wharton, and, like, nursing and engineering are just, like, never really there, right? Because they're much smaller schools in comparison. And so we were like, how do we get more representation? Same with for, like, international students or, like, FGLI transfer students or whatever the case may be. We were like, how do we support everybody when there are these niche concerns that everybody has? And the reality was we couldn't do it all, and so we had to just do our best, right? And so now it's quite fun to see all of these groups pop up, because I'm like, okay, the work that we wanted to do is happening organically. We had a lot of conversations about what would it mean if Penn First became an umbrella group, similar to how, like, Umoja is, or the Latinx Coalition, or APSC or something like that. Like, what would it mean for that to be the case? And some folks didn't really like that idea, and I was like, well, it would make sense eventually, right? I don't think that has quite happened as far as I've seen. But I think it's nice, because those niche challenges finally have room to breathe, essentially. And then also the other thing that's just really cool is now with the creation of Penn First Plus, like, I hope that this is not perceived in the wrong way, but I think, like, I see the work that Penn First did initially has essentially become completed, because at the end of the day, our primary goal was that FGLI students would have support and that it would be institutionalized. It wasn't 10 students who were sitting on this board having to go knock on people's doors to be like, hi, can we please have XYZ thing? Now, like, yes, student advocacy is still important, and I'm not arguing that it's not, or that, like, the issues aren't as big anymore. But what I'm saying is there is dedicated space to air out those issues, and there are dedicated staff people whose entire jobs is to figure out what students are struggling with and try to provide solutions. And it is just such a different landscape. And so that means, going back to your question about like what was Penn First like, we talked so much about just creating community. Like, we wanted to do advocacy work, but also it was so important to have a social space where students felt they could show up as themselves and not pretend to not struggle with money or not have like whatever difficulties. And so to me, when I look at this, I'm like, these groups actually get to live out the vision that we wanted for them, right? So it's exciting. Yeah, I'm a bit of a crier when I when I feel like emotionally happy about things, but like, so don't mind me if I tear up a little bit, but yeah, I just feel like the aspirations that we wanted for the community are finally happening, and it's really heartwarming to see.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess now that we have like Penn First Plus and like an institutional space for FGLI students to go and really like talk about like FGLI issues, stuff like that, what do you think would be like the next step for the FGLI community? Like, if you had a magic wand, could wave it around and make like something appear, like what do you think would be like the next step?
It's a great question. I feel like my answer is going to kind of not answer your question. Okay. So I'm sorry in advance, and feel free to have me re-answer it if you don't think this is like the answer you're necessarily going for. When I think about the steps that have been made for FGLI students, one, it's phenomenal. And it also means like for folks who were in a situation like I was in, I was like bottom of the barrel, like full transparency. Like when I was a student here, my family's income was $15,000 a year. And so we were kind of poorest of the poor on campus, right? And so I was well supported with financial aid. I wanted for nothing, right? I saw the most trouble with my friends who they didn't necessarily feel they could identify as FGLI, but they were in kind of a middle income situation where, like, based on how Penn awards aid, you know, Penn thought their family, based on what's on paper, like, could afford a certain amount, but the family doesn't necessarily feel they can afford that, right? And so I think that can be tricky. I'm not necessarily, well, I'm not at all suggesting Penn like changes aid policy or anything like that, because I think it's much more nuanced than that blanket statement, especially now having years of working with folks in financial aid. But I also, I don't know, I empathize so much with those students. Like, I had a friend when I was here who would identify as middle income, and her parents refused to pay the like expected family contribution. They just left it completely up to her. Well, that effectively meant like she was working like 60 hours a week when she was here. She worked with me at one job. She also nannied, and I think she did something else. I don't entirely remember what it was, but like she, am I allowed to cuss?
Of course.
Yes. Okay. She worked her ass off, right? And I was just like constantly heartbroken to see how much work she had to put in because like of her situation. And again, I'm not saying that's Penn's fault. Like, part of it was because like the parents just chose not to be involved, right? But like there is so much hardship that's happening in that gray space. That like I understand why policies make it hard to best support those students, but like if I could wave a magic wand, it would be that there would be more support for folks who like, you know, on paper look a certain way but have family situations that don't necessarily allow them to pay in that way. So not necessarily more resources for what we currently think of as FGLI students. I'm not saying FGLI students have everything they need right now either, but like when I think about what I think the university's next step should be, it's really addressing that gray space.
Awesome. I guess another question that I wanted to dive into, because we talked a little bit about advocacy work, like your experience with that. I was curious about your maybe like day-to-day experience as a student. Primarily, like you mentioned, like your family made like $15,000 a year. How did it feel like going from like back home where like you were living in that like environment versus like coming to Penn where like everyone around you is making like six figures or you have like so much like wealth around you, and I guess like even like post-graduation when you're like working like a higher like paying job, etc. I guess what were you like what did you like kind of grapple with in terms of like emotions, if you're like comfortable talking about that, or what were you kind of seeing, feeling during that time?
Absolutely, totally. I'm fully an open book, so happy to talk about the emotions related to that. I will warn you two in advance, I may cry, but I am perfectly fine, don't worry. So again, like while I was a student, I didn't really think too much about class, honestly. Like, again, privileged perspective to not think about it, but like most of my friends were not actually FGLI students, but they were middle income students where like my best friend when I was at Penn was like child of immigrants. Like, yes, both her parents made six figures and she had a pretty cushy like New Jersey life. But no shade to Jersey, but maybe a little shade to Jersey. Okay, well, sorry. That you're from there. Yeah. Anyway, so she had this cushy life, but again, she's like children of immigrants. Like they had such strong values in like how you treat people and like, you know, the efforts that they made to like make a home for their family in the US, and like, and those values were really instilled in them. And so even though we were in vastly different socioeconomic situations, like she got me, she understood, and like it just simply was not something we struggled with. And similarly, like one of my other closest friends when I was here was an international student from Turkey, and he like, I don't know, he didn't really value spending money a lot, so he didn't put a lot of pressure on it. Like, a lot of what we did was just hang out in Harrison and, like, cook dinner in people's rooms, and that's it. Like, I never went to downtowns, never, like, I don't know. I was so oblivious to that life at Penn. So I didn't really feel the class differences while I was here. And, you know, you kind of asked about my day-to-day, and I mean, I worked a lot. I worked in Harrison. I also, my freshman year, I also worked at Annenberg Center for Performing Arts. I think my sophomore year, I was maybe only working at Harrison, and then my junior and senior years, I worked in Harrison and also worked at Character Lab. Because again, going into my junior year, I thought I wanted to go into psych research eventually. And actually this, bringing Valerie DeCruz back up again, she was a phenomenal mentor, and I was talking to her about that, and you know the meme that's like, well, what if we just called Taylor up, you know? She literally sends an email to Angela Duckworth, and she's like, hi, I have a student who is interested in working in a lab, like, do you have anything? And then like a couple weeks later, I got outreach from somebody on her team who was like needed someone to help with something, and so I ended up working there.
That's awesome.
It was insane, and I was like, this is like quite literally one of the biggest names in psychology right now. Like, this is massive. Like, little junior me who was like, I want to go to grad school and I want to work in psychology. Like, I was dying. Like, I was absolutely fangirling. Now, did I see Angela ever? Like, twice. I pass her on the street all the time now, and she has absolutely no idea who I am, but I'm like, I know you. I have, like, organized your storage closet. And, like, and, like, helped run studies in your lab, and that's about it, right? No shade to Angela also. Like, her lab is just massive. Like, she just has so many talented researchers there. Like, no, I didn't work directly with her, but like the work that Character Lab does was incredible. Anyway, all that is to say, I worked a lot. I don't know what else there is to say about my time. I basically worked 20 hours a week. I like live, sleep, how can I say it? Slept breathed. I don't even know. Words are just not my thing on a Thursday afternoon. Anyway, I was just in Harrison all the time, working, doing homework, whatever. That's pretty much what I did. And then, yeah, there would be Penn First stuff. Like, I would go to meetings with admin and then report back to the board, and we'd have board meetings once a week, and we'd do events. But, like, I wasn't involved in any other extracurriculars. I did Penn First and only Penn First. I was a peer advisor in the college, and that's maybe the extent of it, right? So, I didn't think too much about class when I was at Penn. When I was leaving Penn, like specifically when I got my job offer for this job, I had so many conflicting emotions. So I'll paint the picture for you. So when I was applying for this job, the salary range for it, I believe, was like somewhere from like starting at 50,000 to maybe 70 or 75. I don't remember what the top of the range was. And I was like, I have no experience. I'm going to get, like, offered the absolute bottom. And, like, still, $50,000 is crazy. Like, coming from the income I was in. And granted, there's, like, cost of living difference. I don't know if I said this in the beginning, but I'm originally from Kansas City, Missouri. And so, admittedly, like, we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, and our rent was, like, $650 a month, right? So, like, cost of living differences are hugely different. Regardless, I was like, $50,000 is a lot of money, and I've been living in Philly with a whole lot less. And so I was like, that's totally fine. Well, then, like, I got the offer. I was working for new student orientation still. It was second year day. I was on College Green, like, hosting the new student orientation office's table. So it was September 20th, 2019. And I got a call from my now 2 bosses, and they offered me $60,000 on the phone. And I was just like, yep, I can start next week. Like, what do you... I can absolutely start. Because in my mind, hearing that number, I was like, at the point in my childhood where my family was the most comfortable, my mom was making $31,000 a year. And that was maybe my, like, sophomore year of high school. She had since lost that job. Most of the time that I was in college, she was working as a cashier in a grocery store. And so, I was just like, it is so unfathomable to me that this like dinky little 22-year-old fresh out of college, is getting offered double what my mom made when she was like a whole ass adult with 3 children. Granted, like, I was the only child in the house at the time because my sisters are much older than me. No shade to them, but they are, you know. The oldest one just turned 35, and she's like, oh, I can't say I'm in my early 30s anymore. Anyway, and so I was just like, I don't deserve this money, and, like, I don't know what to do with this money. And it's still emotional for me to think about, because I'm just like, I feel so unnecessarily privileged, like, to have this experience. And it just feels so arbitrary that the reason why I'm being offered this is because I got a college degree and my mom didn't. And I'm like, she worked so hard my entire life, you know, and continues to do so to take care of herself. And it is just absolutely insane to me that I'm like, I walk around with students in inflatable pig suits, like, 3 out of 5 days a week. And, like, and I mean, I do serious work. Like, let me not shade my program. But I'm like, I get to do fun stuff with college students as a job, and I get paid this much. And, like, since then, like, I make more. And, like when there are increases, I'm just like, it is so hard for me to fathom, like, why I have earned this life, right? So there are, thank you. There are a lot of feelings about that, and a lot of just like, yeah, why do I have this life? And I still deal with it. Like, I will be honest with you, like, this is one of the number one things I talk about in therapy, which is just like, it is, again, I've used this word like 6 times now, but it is completely unfathomable to me, the life that I have. Like, I live in a nice apartment with my boyfriend and our 3 cats and like can like take care of myself and meet my basic necessities and like spend money frivolously on things that don't matter, and like it like continues to just be bizarre, quite frankly. And you know, I not to air out other people's lives, but like I have a student on my team who is also a FGLI student and got an offer for 6 figures for after he graduates. And
That's
I was
awesome.
I was like, if you need to talk about this at any point, like, come and see me, because this is one of the things I struggled with the most. And I wasn't even making as much as you're making now, but like, you don't realize it, but you are going to feel so many emotions about just how arbitrary these numbers are. And I don't know, one of the things I think about the most is like, historically, people in my family have worked really labor-intensive jobs, and they make so little. Like, my sister literally works on the assembly line at General Motors. Like, she builds cars every day of her life, and she still makes less than I do. And I'm like, she is quite literally, like, not to say risking her life, because it's not quite that, but she's, like, beating herself up on a daily basis, right? And I'm like, I get to, again, sit at a desk all day or walk around with students in a pig suit. And I don't know, it just, as much as I'd love to say the feelings get easier, they really don't. You just kind of learn how to sit with them, you know? So I appreciate you both sitting here kindly as I cry about this. But yeah, that's my long answer.
Yeah, I feel like I definitely like resonate with that a lot. Even like now, like as a college student, I feel like my college experience was pretty similar. Like most of the people who I'm like surrounded with aren't like first gen low income. They do like have like somewhat more wealth in like their families, but yeah. I think like coming on campus for the first time, and I also lived in Harrison my freshman year because it was COVID, so we had to spread everyone out, and then I was lucky enough to get a single in Harrison, so it was just me like freshman spring semester in my like little single in Harrison, the 24th floor, just like overlooking like all of like West Philly.
Penthouse suite.
yeah, pretty much. Like that was how I like thought of it actually. Like even though like I guess it's not comparable to like the quad or like anything else, but I feel like my first experience like on campus, like I hadn't like explored Penn beforehand, but this being like my first experience like on campus, like overlooking like all of like West Philly in my little single in Harrison, I think I just like sat there for like a good like 30 minutes or something, just like contemplating like, am I like really here, kind of, because I found myself just like comparing like the like penthouse suite basically like of Harrison to what it's like back home, like living like family of 5, having like only like 1 bedroom, stuff like that. And I feel like even like the small things, like going to like the dining hall to like eat like food, and I feel like we all love to like hate on commons.
Yes, we do.
I think K-Check is probably the best dining hall.
Yep. Agreed.
But I think the first like couple of days when I was like eating at the dining hall, I found myself just like thinking like, oh, like I wish like my like sisters were here. I have like 2 younger sisters. I wish my sisters were here to kind of like experience it, because I mean it's basically like a buffet or something.
Yeah.
So I was like, I wish my sisters were here. I wish like my mom and dad were here just to like experience all of this like with me. And like even like looking back, like I do complain about commons like a healthy amount, but even looking back, I was like, I really wish that my family could experience like all of this wealth, if you can call it, with me.
Absolutely.
And like the first time my parents like visited like campus, I like saw my mom and dad just like, I brought them to commons because nothing else was open.
Yeah.
But I saw
Sorry,
them like,
Mom and Dad.
yeah, unfortunate first dining hall experience at Penn, but I saw them like walk around with their like plates of food, like looking like happy, and like they were like, oh, there's like ice cream over there. There's like a little like waffle making machine over there, and I was like, I think in the moment I was like really happy I could kind of share that experience with them, and also like kind of similar to what you mentioned, like making like after college, like when you're like offered like jobs that give you like 6 figures or like stuff like that. I was just like looking at like gap year opportunities because I'm gonna like apply to med school, and then I was planning on taking maybe like 1 or 2 gap years, and I was looking at the like salary offer, and I'm like, this is like already more than my dad makes, like, and he's been with his company doing assembly work for like 10 plus years. So yeah, I feel like I definitely resonated with everything you said, even now, despite not having graduated yet.
It's tough. When you get there, I'm here to chat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, yeah, if I start talking about it, I'll definitely start crying. No, it's definitely like this feeling of, it's just like minor stuff too. Like my college house took us out to a basketball game, and I was telling my brother, like, yeah, we got to sit in the box and these really nice seats. He's like, oh, remember that time we snuck down to the lower bowl? I'm like, yeah, I do. And it's just like really minor things like that where in the moment you enjoy it, and then like when you tell your family about it, you enjoy it, but sometimes like when you sit down, you're like, wow.
Like it stings a little.
Yeah, like. Yeah. And especially with my older brother, he went to college at Art University, but he had to kind of commute from home. And there's all the times like, oh, you know, I wish I was like in your position. I wish I was in the dorm. And he's really conscious about it too, where like he tries to draw it back. Yeah. But even then, like I do wish you were here. Like I wish you, like, even if it was still at home, I wish you got to live on campus. You know, this is gonna sound silly, but I'm like, I wish you could have rushed that frat.
Yeah.
And it's stuff like, because like me, you know, when I came in, I didn't think Greek life was possible. Just because like my background, but kind of meeting my sorority and like finding out there's like financial assistance, and my brother's like, just do it, like I'll pay for it, because like he kind of gave our family the financial freedom to like take a risk, and that's kind of where they view me as, like he gave us like the ability to like survive, like breathe. Yeah. And where like there's kind of that pressure, like, okay, you're the person who's gonna have us thrive. Yeah. And even then, like I think I view it like less as a burden and more like I finally get to give back to them.
It's important.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast episode. I feel like we definitely covered a wide range of topics, from advocacy to your experience like post-grad and the different feelings you were feeling as you were navigating that. But yeah, thank you again. Really appreciate you being on the podcast, and thank you for all of your advice. I think final like ending question, do you have any resources or any shout outs that you want to give before we close out this podcast?
Well, I obviously have to shout out Financial Wellness at Penn. I'm biased because I run it, but genuinely, like, I don't know. I don't even know what to say about it. I think it can be hard to identify what your questions even are. So if you don't know where to start, come see us. Like, we want to help students feel less stressed about finances. And we very much recognize, like, we cannot fix poverty with financial education, but we want folks to have the tools for when, you know, you are in my shoes eventually and you get an offer and you don't know how to react to it. Like, we want you to have the tools, because that day is coming for you. Like, you will, all of this work that you have put in is going to pay off eventually. And yeah, I selfishly want you to have the tools to best approach it at the time. So come see us. We have really ridiculous merch with pigs on it, so please come see us. If I could shout out anything else, again, like, find an advocate on campus. For me, like, it was my boss in Harrison, Frank Pelicone. He was just an absolute asset to me. Troy Monerick in New Student Orientation, and then again Valerie DeCruz at the GIC. Like, those were really my people when I was here. And whoever those people are for you, Definitely get the help that you need to sort things out. And yeah, I hope folks are finding their own little niche communities within the FGLI community. It's been really heartwarming to watch the way that the community has changed over the years. And so, yeah, come see us at Financial Wellness. I'd love to see you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks again for joining us. And for those of you who are listening, you can follow us on Instagram at FGLI Podcast, as well as Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. Yeah, thanks everyone for listening.